Okay, so let's continue. The next thing, we've talked about the tool setup. We've talked about a starting pose. Now let's look at a slightly more complex setup. So here we have a curve that's been drawn in Rhino, and it's floating up above the table so we don't hit the table with the robot. And, we can talk about just basic grasshopper um, procedures. For example, here we've imported the curve and we're using a divide curve component to divide it up into a series of points. We can change the number of targets. Increasing the number of targets just basically gives you more precision. Um, and then we are generating planes, which we have shown here. Uh, and you can see that those planes are all facing in the same orientation. They're not following the rotation of the curve. They're all just sitting on the curve, but they're not rotating with the curve. Those planes then become our targets. So when we come back and copy paste and start a new target component, what we're telling it in this case, we've opened up and added a movement, a motion input. So we have an M here. Before we didn't have these. So there's options buried in these components, and if you right click on them, you're able to get more options. So instead of just a start pose, here we're bringing in a bunch of planes. So notice that this one is a joint target. So it is expecting us to give it joint rotation angles. However, this one has no joints enabled. It has planes as the inputs because we are bringing in planes from our curve. So targets have different kinds of inputs. Sometimes they're joint rotation angles, sometimes they're actual plane geometry that we're using to align the robot. Other than that, there's two ways that we can move a robot: in a series of arcs or straight from point to point. So we're using that linear motion as our option. And then here we've collected all of the stuff that came out of our divide curve component, all those points. We have planes attached to them, and we're basically just bringing all of those planes as a list or a series of target points that we're using so that the robot knows what to follow. Finally, we are wanting to tuck the robot back in when we're done. So we have another series of joint angles. So it's not going to be 90 degrees, it's going to kind of tuck back in. Um, and then that is connected to, once again, a joint target. We like to collect these things into like a merged list. So Grasshopper has a very handy component called merge, and you can just kind of collect things into a bucket. Sometimes I'll use a couple of them and merge like twice, but ultimately you just want to give one list of targets to our program so that it can generate the program correctly and not cause any errors.